Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to On the Ballot. I'm your host, normally a senior editor here at Ballotpedia. And one of the things that we're known for at Ballotpedia is finding out, covering what's going on in Congress, since it seems to affect us all. But we don't have all the answers, and heaven knows the answers are sometimes hard to come by. That's why we turn to pros. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by one of those pros, Nicholas Wu, the congressional reporter for Politico. Nicholas, thank you for joining us.
Norm, thanks for having me, and thanks for considering me to be a pro.
Well, yeah, it is a tough job to cover the Hill, and they're back from recess. We should preface that. So what it means is Congress comes back, and they have a great deal of work to do. But as you look at what's going up on the Hill, what is the biggest thing on their agenda right now?
The biggest thing for pretty much every single member of Congress right now is the government funding deadline coming up at the end of the month. And the issue there is just like where exactly they're going to be able to find the votes to keep the lights on in the government, let alone coming to any kind of long-term funding deal. There's a lot of questions on both sides of the aisle about how they can get there.
And when you talk about whether they can find the votes, you're talking about whether the Republicans can find the votes. Unless there's some bipartisan talk about funding, are you hearing any of that?
So far as we've reported so far, there are no major bipartisan talks on funding. Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries had uh, what they called a general conversation last week. There was a very short-term patch that was floated, but Democrats are really saying that this is like a non-starter until they get uh, larger scale negotiations going that involve the appropriators, Senate leadership, and so on.
And we talked about, again, looking for votes on this. That implies that there are still divisions within the Republican caucus about how and what to fund in the federal government. Is that still the case?
It very much is. I mean, among Republicans right now, you do have a diversity of different opinions about um, what a funding deal could look like. You've seen a short-term funding patch floated among some Republicans so that they could try to come to some sort of year-long spending deal. It's the preference of other Republicans to come up with a year-long continuing resolution, and then for their administration to send rescissions packages along the way to cancel out funding that they don't like. Obviously, that would be a non-starter for Democrats. And so, the political pressure is not limited to Republicans too. I mean, with the filibuster still intact in the Senate, you need Democratic senators to advance any kind of government funding legislation. And we saw what a huge backlash Democrats faced last March when they did allow a government funding uh, patch through. And so, this is something that a lot of Democrats are keeping in mind as they look over their shoulder with primary season coming up, with a base level thirst for generational change in the party. It's something that and with Democrats looking for ways to show that they're taking the fight to Donald Trump. And so, we'll have to wait and see how exactly this shakes out.
So it seems like, at least on the Democratic side, there are competing forces at work, which you mentioned several of them right there. So I want to try to unpack that for a second. You talked about them wanting to take the fight to Donald Trump, and yet Democrats traditionally are the ones who want to keep government working. How do they reconcile that against a backdrop of portions of a base, I should be clear, that really do want them to, and maybe go as far to say, yes, embrace a shutdown because that's the way to fight?
That's really the struggle that Democrats face right now. Remember back in March, you had a little over half a dozen Democratic senators who voted to help advance a Republican funding patch, and this came from the overall belief among a lot of Democrats that yes, that they had to be the adults in the room. They couldn't let the government shut down. But remember, for Democrats, this is set against the backdrop of DOGE, of rescission packages coming through, and a federal government that's doing a lot of things that they don't like. And so now you have an activist base that's very mad at Democratic leadership for having done that and allowing the Trump administration to keep on doing all of these things on immigration, precision packages and so on that Democrats very, very much don't like to see happen. And so, fast forward to now, all these pressures are still at play. Back in March, some members of the House, even moderate Democrats, were so mad about the way that Chuck Schumer handled the funding fight that there was talk, even among moderate Democrats, of backing a primary challenger to Chuck Schumer. That's died down a little bit in the intervening months, but that could very much come back to the fore in the coming weeks, depending on how this plays out. And that's something that is very much in the minds of Democratic leadership as they try to chart their way through this funding battle.
Well, and even in the last few days, we've seen a member of the Democratic leadership, Jerry Nadler, Democrat of New York, uh, ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, uh, announced that he's not going to run for reelection, stepping down, specifically mentioning that it's time to turn over leadership to a younger generation. Is Nadler onto something? Or is this going to come to a head in the midterms?
This is very much something that we could see play out over the next year or so as primaries ramp up. Jerry Nadler was kind of an interesting case because he, obviously a luminary in the party, someone who played a large role in leadership in helping lead the impeachments of Donald Trump during his first time in office. But last year, at the end of the previous Congress, he was kind of pushed out of his job as the top Judiciary Committee Democrat over concerns that he wouldn't be able to mount a visible enough, a vigorous enough resistance to Donald Trump. And this was after another colleague, Jamie Raskin, actually challenged him for the job. And so the question now for Democrats is whether these very long tenured senior members of their party, some of whom are facing primary challengers who are trying to make age an issue in the primary elections, whether they step aside or whether they stick it out to the end. All eyes, in a lot of ways, are on another district in Georgia, where David Scott, the former head, top Democrat on the Agriculture Committee, who was similarly pushed out of that job last year, faces quite a few primary challenges. But of course, these are always very low turnout elections. Um, Pair that with a anti-incumbent mood in the party, and we might see a lot of change happen.
Now, away from all of this stuff, the money issues, the funding issues, the possible generational squabbling, what else should we be watching for as the worthies return to Capitol Hill? What other issues are on their agenda?
There's a lot happening right now. I mean, this gets kind of into the procedural weeds, but a very live issue right now for Republican leadership is a discharge petition that's been filed by Congressman Khanna and Massey, a Democrat and a Republican, in an effort to try to compel the release of more files related to Jeffrey Epstein.
Mm.
This is something that's very much a headache for Republican leadership and in many ways for the Trump White House, which is, this is kind of um, become very much a liability in a lot of ways for Hill Republicans who very much don't want to have to vote on something that is Epstein related, and for the Trump White House too, which very much sees this as a distraction from all they're doing right now to try to go out and sell the big beautiful bill and all of its provisions.
Well, and one thing that I did see is that the White House is going to, if it hasn't already, put together a new marketing plan for the one big beautiful bill to help Republicans sell it to the folks back home. What's going on with that?
This is kind of the salesmanship part of this whole process. I mean, normally with these kinds of big pieces of legislation, the name that's given in some ways has like an external component to it. Democrats had the Inflation Reduction Act,
Right.
the original tax package that Republicans passed during Trump's first term was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Big beautiful bill. It was something that Trump came up with, Republican leadership rolled with. But obviously, it's not as descriptive of what the bill does. And so now, as members are going out to try to sell this and are facing, in some cases in town halls and public events, some level of voter backlash to this legislation, they're trying to figure out ways to, to better communicate what's in this. Because that the tricky part with these massive reconciliation bills now is that there's just so much in them that in many ways it's much more difficult for members of Congress to go and sell all the different provisions of it, as opposed to a single tax cut or a single program that they could point to, a single bridge or whatever that they funded in their district. It's much harder.
It's like trying to sell a collage. Well, this piece over here, that's the one you should pay attention to. Never mind the rest of the stuff up on the wall. But um, because you're in Washington D.C. and well, there's been so much discussion about it, is tell me about the status of funding for the enhanced military, police, law enforcement presence in Washington D.C. Where does that stand?
This is something that's been talked about among Republicans, but so far has not quite yet materialized. There's a lot of grumbling, particularly among the Hill Democrats, among DC politicians, um, that is the district, about the billion that was cut from the city's budget earlier this year as part of the March government funding package. And now, you have the president and other Republicans talking about plussing up money for DC security. And so, the question is how exactly that comes together. And if it does, this is something that could be somewhat of a difficult vote for Democrats because, a lot of centrist Democrats are very sensitive to voter concerns about being perceived as soft on crime or, you know, uh, uh, too beholden to parts of their base. And so something like this DC related bills are something that Republicans have used with varying degrees of effect in the past to try to jam Democrats. And so uh, perhaps this could be something that could come together as part of the government funding negotiations.
And we got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to ask you this: if there's a lot of plates spinning right now, and there's going to be a lot of attention placed on certain issues, like we've discussed. But what is your sleeper issue? What is the one that's hiding out there, maybe in plain sight, that we really ought to be focusing more on than we are currently?
My personal obsession is with the moves around redistricting we're seeing all around the country.
Mhm.
Because you know, i- in isolation, these look like little tinkerings here and there. California adds 5 seats, maybe Texas adds 5 red seats. Missouri could add another red seat, and so on. But when we think about it, on the whole, there's only a few dozen competitive House seats to begin with, and when you really do start to strip away the number of seats that are competitive, we're looking at potentially a much different House battlefield, an even smaller one that we've seen in years. So this is something that I think will be a very slow burn throughout this whole campaign cycle until we say fall of next year. We're looking at a smaller House campaign map and even more expensive, even more competitive elections fought in fewer places.
So, just to see if I've got this right, if all of these tinkerings come to fruition, and there's no guarantee that any of them will, we could actually see a handful of districts play an even larger role in who controls Congress.
I think that's right. I mean, think about as someone who's covered a lot of House campaigns, think about the outsized amount of tension we've seen on, um, the battleground seats in California over the past few years. Those might slide entirely off the map altogether. The seats in Texas, right, perhaps are now, the Republicans are hoping that they will just add 5 safer Republican seats to the map. Ohio could take some of those competitive seats off the map. And so we're looking at an even smaller and smaller battlefield, especially if Florida gets into the mix, where they're looking to add maybe a couple, 2 to 3 more Republican seats.
And is there any chatter among members on the Hill about this stuff? How closely are they? I assume they're following it very closely.
Members of Congress are watching all of this very closely, and in some cases are very much involved in the whole process. But interestingly enough, um, perhaps one of the most vocal members about this has been Kevin Kiley of California, who's uh, a Republican. He's introduced a bill to try to ban gerrymandering, but he really hasn't found many other allies in doing so, since Republicans, despite previous private misgivings about redistricting, are going full steam ahead with it, and Democrats are seeing that they have to find ways to retaliate. And so, despite years of Democrats and some Republicans saying that they need to do ban partisan gerrymandering, to bring in independent commissions, make sure that politicians aren't joining their districts and so on. What we're really seeing now is very much an arms race in that whole fight.
which is which is another way of saying, if you happen to live in one of those competitive districts, buckle up. It's going to get rough come election day. Nicholas Wu, Politico's congressional reporter, I appreciate very much you taking the time to give us an update on what's happening, what to look out for, and it's particularly the sleeper issues that's going on Capitol. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Norm.
And for our listeners, if you want to learn more about what's on the congressional agenda this month and some other issues coming out, check out the show links. And we'll be back with another episode of On the Ballot soon. We'll be taking a look at some more stuff that's going on in the federal government, including a history of government shutdowns, real, imagined, and otherwise. And what I think is a sleeper issue, whether the debates and struggles over big tech data centers might seep into both ballot measures and races coming up in the year to come. Make sure to subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on YouTube as well. I'm Norm Leahy, your host. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you on the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.